What's up, everybody? Welcome to Heresy Financial. My name is Joe Brown, and we've all been hearing about all of the increased spending plans that are trying to make their way through the various branches of government right now, and everybody's expecting a lot of money to be spent by the federal government this year. Now, for some people, this has sparked concerns about the national debt exploding. There are some estimates that the deficit this year will be close to $5 trillion. For others, it has sparked concerns about inflation with that much new money hitting the economy. What will that do to prices? Now, despite the fact that we're going to most likely see a massive increase in government spending this year, it's not likely going to have as big of an impact on the national debt as some people are saying. So you ask, how is that? How can the government actually spend a lot more than they're bringing in and it not have the same impact on the debt? Because if your income is less than your expenses, your debt will grow proportionately to what the difference is, right? That's the deficit. I'm glad you asked that because the answer is the Treasury General Account. Now, if you remember, I've talked about the Treasury General Account before. Back in about September, I thought Trump was going to use the money in the Treasury General Account prior to the election. Well, clearly that didn't happen. However, it looks like now Congress is about to tap into the $1.6 trillion that's currently sitting in that account. So what we're going to look at today is, what is this account and where did all this money come from that's just sitting in it? And number two, what is the impact going to be on inflation and the debt with this account being drained and spent? And then finally, what happens when that account is drained and the money in it is gone? Ready? Let's dive in. All right, so the Treasury General Account, you can think of this simply as the bank account for the government. That's it. It's just their checking account. When money comes in through taxes or borrowing, it goes into the Treasury General Account. And when money goes out, when they pay employees and when they pay contractors, goes out of that account. But it doesn't work exactly like all normal bank accounts, at least not anymore. So let's take a step back in time, and we can see here that for many years, the Treasury General Account fluctuated right around $5 billion. There were spikes and they would come right back down to somewhere around that $5 billion mark. Now, back then, the Treasury General Account operated very similarly to any other bank account. It operated inside of the banking system. So cash that was held in this account was part of the general banking reserves, and it could be used as such. It was in the banking system. Now, if we fast forward a little bit, we can see that there was a spike in the amount of money that went into the Treasury General Account right when the government and the Fed started to do intervention to try and rescue the economy from the great financial crisis. Now, there was a mechanical change set up with this account at that time. Basically, what the Fed did was they said, all right, government, Treasury, you're not going to have your bank account in the banking system anymore to where all of that cash and all those reserves are accessible in the system. We're going to set up a separate bank account for you that's held directly at the Federal Reserve, and the money that's in your account is no longer part of the reserves in the system anymore. They did this because they needed to inject a lot of capital, they needed to purchase a lot of assets, the government needed to borrow a lot more, and they didn't want a flood of excess reserves hitting the system and crushing the banks because of excess reserves. So now, any money that goes into the Treasury's bank account is outside of the banking system until it's spent again. It'd be similar to printing money and dropping it off on Mars. It is simply outside of the banking system until it's brought back in and spent. This turned the Treasury General Account into basically a reservoir for excess reserves in the system. And you can see that since that change, the amount of money that was held in this account was still very volatile, but it was a lot more than it used to. It really had a floor now of about 20 billion, and for a while it had a ceiling of around 120 billion, but even that started to grow. Around 2016, that cap started hitting all the way up to about 400 billion. Now again, this is the checking account for the federal government. Money comes in to the TGA, the Treasury General Account. Money comes in there through from their income, which is taxes and borrowing, and money is spent from there. So any money the government spends comes out of there. Now we know that the government has been running basically permanent deficits for decades. And so this is basically the same thing as whenever you need to pay the bills, You go to the bank, you get a large loan, and you just throw it in your bank account. And then you spend your bills from that. And once you're running low, you go back to the bank, get another loan, throw it in your bank account, and spend, all your bills from that again. That's essentially what this account is for. Except instead of having to go qualify for a loan at the bank, they just call up the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve prints out some money for them. Now, I know, it's not exactly like that. It has to go through the primary dealers, has to go through the banking system. But essentially, if you follow that chain of events back, the Federal Reserve is the source of money that the government spends. Now, let's bring this to the present. As soon as COVID hits, we see the Treasury General Account spike. Hits $1.8 trillion. Just explodes and dwarfs anything that has happened before. Now, what happened here? Basically, the government took out a loan for $3 trillion and only spent $1.2 trillion of that. Now, of course, that's net when you account for all the money coming in, all the money going out, looking at how much debt they borrowed. Essentially on net, they took out a $3 trillion loan from the Federal Reserve, and they spent $1.2 trillion of it. That's why when we go over and look at the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, the balance sheet increased by $3 trillion. Now, many people look at the Federal Reserve's balance sheet and say, this is insane. Money supply is exploding. Look at the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. Look at how much debt they're monetizing. Look at how much money they're printing. $3 trillion just in that one little spike. What's next? But you have to ask, where is this money going? Went from $4 trillion to $7 trillion. That means they printed and gave out somewhere $3 trillion, went to the federal government. They spent $1.2 trillion, 1.8 got stuck in their bank account. They haven't spent it yet. This is why all year long during 2020, Powell, in all of his press conferences, kept on saying we need more fiscal spending, fiscal support, fiscal, because he's like, look, we can monetize as much debt as possible, like as much as we want. The federal government can borrow as much as they want from us. There's no limit. But if the only thing they do with that is just stick those loans in their bank account and don't spend it, it's meaningless. It's just numbers on a paper. It's not real. It's like getting a 0% loan from your bank and just placing that loan in your bank account and not touching it. Nothing happened. Your income didn't change. Your expenses didn't change. Your net worth didn't change. It's like it didn't happen. But all this is about to change. And that brings us to today. The Treasury has lowered their borrowing expectations going forward, even in the face of increased expense expectations. So that makes some people wonder, hey, if you're going to borrow less money, but you're actually increasing the amount you're spending, we know you can't make up for that in taxes. How in the world are you going to increase your spending? Well, they've got $1.6 trillion to tap in that TGA. So what does this mean for inflation? Well, a lot of people look at the total money supply for inflation. A lot of people look at the Federal Reserve's balance sheet for expectations about inflation going forward. But since so much of it, more than half of the money that the Federal Reserve printed by monetizing all this debt has gotten stuck in this account that is not part of the banking system. It is out of circulation. And now they are going to spend it. This is part of the reason that we didn't see as much inflation over the last year as a lot of people thought that we would see. I know the official inflation numbers are understated, but even the people who understand that and do some of their own calculations, there are a lot of people who are expecting a lot more inflation than we've seen so far, even adjusting for the kind of the false or manipulated down numbers that are official. It's because not all of the money has actually hit the system yet. Now, as Lynn Alden shows, there is a big difference between base money and broad money. This is one of the reasons why in Japan, even though their base money exploded and it has been going up a lot and it's a vertical line, their broad money has been a very slow, steady growth. So they haven't seen inflation because the proper place to look at inflation is where the money is, the money that's actually in circulation. Base money, or money that is not in the system, is meaningless. So the real problem shows up when this broad money number starts to increase, and you can see right at the end here recently, our broad money supply in the US has been turning vertical. Not a good sign. And all of this spending that is about to happen this year is moving money from base money to broad money. It's taking money that has been out of circulation, $1.8 trillion, $1.6 trillion, and it's moving it into circulation. Now, just remember how much prices reacted last year when the first $1.2 trillion hit the system. Prices explode, right? You had gold explode, you had silver explode, Bitcoin exploded, houses exploded, stocks exploded. Materials and commodities started exploding. Even food has been on the rise. And that was the first 1.2 trillion. We're about to get the other 1.6 that's left in there, and probably just within the next couple of months. And the thing to remember is that this isn't going to touch the national debt at all. All the money has already been printed, it's already been borrowed, it's just waiting in an account outside of the system, waiting to be spent. So it's once that money is spent and put into circulation, put into the banking system, put into people's hands, that's when it starts to really accelerate the pace of inflation and prices of assets, goods, and services going up across the board. So what happens after this then, after they've drained this account? Well, obviously, if their checking account is drained and they're still spending more than they're bringing in from their income, which is taxes, then they have to borrow the rest. Now that borrowing, some of it might be from individuals, institutions, pensions, central banks around the world, but a lot of that will be virtually financed indirectly by the Federal Reserve. And so likely towards the second half of this year, we're going to see another explosion in the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. As long as the government is spending money into the economy, it makes no difference whether that money came from debt, which is never going to be repaid, or if they were tapping into a legitimate straight up money printer that they had access to. The effect on the economy is the same. It is new money that has come into existence out of nothing, coming into the system. And remember, when it's in the Treasury General Account, it doesn't count yet. It hasn't yet come into the system. It's not in existence yet. So deficits actually don't matter because the deficit could explode and all of that extra borrowed money could just go into the Treasury General Account, wouldn't have the slightest impact on anybody anywhere. It's the spending that matters. Now, further than this, there are going to be some unintended consequences. Likely what we're going to experience within the next couple of months is that the supply of T-bills and treasuries is probably going to dry up and cause some crazy things to start happening in the credit markets that nobody was expecting because the government is issuing a lot less of this over the next, quarter or two. So this could mean that we could see a spike in interest rates, especially when you pair that with most likely a spike in inflation since all this new money is hitting the broad money supply and going into circulation. Now, I've talked about this before, but spiking interest rates means the economy and the government is insolvent because there's not enough productive growth or income to service that debt that it already has by financing it. And so additional debt is required to roll it over, and you can't do that. It's too expensive if the interest rates get too high. So there could be definitely some big unintended consequences, kind of like second and third order effects from this. Federal Reserve is going to have to step in and monetize even more of the debt to jack up the interest rates, but that means that the government is then going to have to issue a lot more debt so that there's something for the Fed to monetize. So I'm unsure what unexpected problems are going to pop up from this. Who knows what little leaks will spring up out of nowhere throughout the credit markets. But I am sure that they are treading in dangerous waters. You can't print your way to prosperity, though they are sure to try. Knowing all this, many of us are saying, I don't want to keep dollars. So if you're trying to move your wealth out of dollars and into something that somebody else doesn't have the power to destroy its value as time goes on, and somebody with, quite honestly, the incentive to do so, I have all of my recommended resources linked in the description below, whether you're trying to buy gold or silver or store it in your IRA or trade options or looking at Bitcoin for the first time, all of that, check out my links in the description below. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Have a good day.